Hey everybody, welcome to the Inside Out Alignment Show, episode number 6. Today we have soccer coach Jack Martin. How you doing, Jack?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm predominantly in the soccer world. Grew up playing soccer at age 5. I'm from a small town north of Dallas, Fort Worth, called Wichita Falls, Texas. Parents were military. There's a military base on there, and my dad was an athlete in college there at Midwestern State University. Gravitated towards more towards baseball and soccer at the time, and then back in those days, nowadays kids are able to play 3 and 4 sports, and they're able to squeeze that all in on a weekend. But now, or back then, I was given the choice. So whether it was either going to be baseball or soccer, and I just took soccer just because of the movement, the mental aspect of learning as you're playing. Soccer I just took to it just because of the physical activity, I think, and then the mental process of trying to figure out the game as you play. It's like a chess game. You just figure out what's working, what doesn't work, and then you just build on those strengths and try to succeed.
Awesome. And full disclosure, Jack has coached both of my daughters. I've seen firsthand not only his expertise with the technical side of it, but also the mental side. And that's why I had him on the podcast today. So before we get started, smash the like button, subscribe to this channel, share this video with your friends. So let's get started. So Jack, you talked a little bit about how you were brought up and sports you focused on. You kind of landed on soccer. So tell us a little bit about what soccer was like for you. And then as you transitioned out of high school and got into coaching, tell us a little about that transition story.
It kind of started from, before high school, the aspect of pickup games, learning new skills on a daily basis if I could. And then it parlayed into high school, where I just found that I kind of had a talent for the sport just due to the fitness level I was always in. It just was one of those things when you're a kid and you feel like you're gravitating towards whether it be a subject in school or sport. So right out of high school or in high school, I was the first 4-letter varsity letterman in the high school at Wichita Falls High School.
Awesome.
After I graduated, I immediately made a team to go to Germany and Austria for 3 months. To kind of round out your question, it was just the transition of going from another country back home, and then trying to find your way to stay in the sport.
Got it. So ultimately, how did you decide to get into coaching? Did it seem to be like a natural evolution? Like, just walk me through the short version of how coaching manifested for you.
Well, not at all exactly. I wasn't a kid type of friendly young adult at the time. I was more into like what I was doing instead of giving the message to someone who needed it about the sport. And I didn't even know I had that tool. A buddy of mine I played at Midwestern with, his name is Brad Flanagan, who was a Dallas resident. He was playing professional indoor soccer for a team called the Dallas Sidekicks. And I moved down here in the Metroplex in 1998, and I was working in the trade show industry. He was playing professional soccer. And when he would go, he built a team out at Solar Soccer Club. And when he would travel, I would cover his practices. And then during the summer, I would do summer camps for the director of coaching there at Solar. His name is Kevin Smith, and just kind of got hooked in. I found that I had a niche to be able to convey the message, the confidence, the assurance that you can do this as long as you decide to do these certain things. Practice, practice, practice. And those were the 3 words I used constantly until I evolved as a coach and started using different terminology to create the excitement for kids to actually come to training. Because as you know, with 2 kids, sometimes going to practice, it's a grind. It's a weekly situation that sometimes your kids don't look forward to because it's too hot, it's too cold, it's raining. Our bodies are, I feel, and minds are in a situation where we think of what's easiest for us to get out of hard situations. And that's where, you know, people like you yourself and me as a coach, I try to bridge that situation where it's like, hey, I know it's not going to be easy, but if you do this, this is what you're going to get as a reward. You're
Right.
going to get better. You're going to build that confidence, and you're just going to be able to perform at a higher level than you probably possibly would just trying to do it on your own.
Right. And we're going to talk a little bit about that stacking of competence, like the technical side, the hard work, right? The daily hard work, which this is just life. Life's not easy. You do the hard work, you build competence. And oh, by the way, the byproduct is confidence. We'll touch on that on the back end. But so this is really interesting. You found like you really had a calling for coaching, certainly had tremendous knowledge on the technical side of soccer. And as you got into this, you realized, let anybody who manages people know, it's less about the tactical and more about what goes on between the ears. So tell us how kind of the mindset, the mental side kind of came to you and you taking that and parlaying it into your daily practice as a coach.
Well, it just got to a point, I think, where internally the competitiveness came from observing sports on TV, listening to my dad in training situations for myself, and then just basically trying to figure out where do you want to be? Where do you want to be in this situation? Do you want to be top 5 player on your team? Do you want to be a technically you may be from a scale from 1 to 10, you may be an 8. So how do you get to that 1? How do you get to that 2? Technically, but it's just putting your head down, I think, and just understanding that it's a process. It's not going to happen overnight. It's continued work. It's just like lifting weights. I can go to the gym today and see no results, but soreness the next day, right?
Right.
But if I continue to do that on a schedule on a weekly basis, I'm eventually going to see some results. In the coaching world, it takes you to a point where you're like, okay, I'm new to this niche of coaching, because back in our days, coaches were dads and not necessarily, they weren't paid coaches,
Right.
and didn't necessarily even play soccer or the sport that you're playing in.
Yep.
So it was like, hey, run. Hey, it was all about, my first coach was a military sergeant in the Army, and he wore his fatigues at our games. I mean, just because he was taking time off of work to coach our games.
Right.
So our training was running. And then all of a sudden the soccer part came next. Eventually you'd be able to learn to get touches. And, he was just a dad. And but mentally it made us tougher, because as you know, as an athlete, when you are constantly in motion and then all of a sudden the game is involved, it's the tactics, the mental side of it. You've got to be thinking on a clear level in order to be playing at a high level while doing all this aerobic exercise and cutting back and forth and transitioning from offense to defense. It's taxing. And once you're conditioned physically, mentally, to your point again, it becomes the mental game. I don't even think about being tired. I think about strategy, the chess game of getting the ball from one side to the other, or getting it to the person who's on today, as far as like maybe shooting or just controlling the game.
Yep. So you're talking a lot about process over outcome, right? And so with my clients and with the Inside Out Alignment Show, it really is about making sure you start here first, right? You got to be talking to yourself a certain way. And so with all this repetition at practice, like people, your players come to you and, hey, I don't want to come today, it's too hot. And so you're teaching them that this physical repetition is how you build the muscle memory, if you will. Right. And so that when pressure comes in, you're in reaction mode. Your subconscious physiology takes over. And what you're talking about in addition to that, and what I preach a lot, is you have to have a parallel mental subconscious autopilot. I'm strong mentally. I happen to know I can go further than I otherwise could. I believe I can power through this physical fatigue because I've got a strong mental mindset. I believe in my capabilities. I have a growth mindset. I'm capable of more than most, right? And so when that gets repeated and conditioned, and the physicality gets repeated and conditioned, then you've got this inside out alignment where both physically and mentally you're strong, and you just
Right.
let subconscious take over. So you were raised in the 80s. I was raised in the 70s and 80s. And so mental anything was not talked about back then. It was really tactics. It was, here's what you do, point A, point B. So for your players now, what does mindset look like in a typical practice? How would you work mindset into the conversation?
You know, over the years, Michael, it's gotten to a point where when I first initially started coaching, I was more or less wanting to make sure we weren't losing games because we were out of shape, right? And then as I evolved as a coach, you start to read body language. You start to, I mean, you learn all this. It's a process, just like playing, going into coaching. You grow, hopefully, in a way that you're starting to understand your players, and then trying to pick their brains about, hey, what are you thinking in this situation? Because this is what I'm seeing as a coach. So I think basically I evolved as a coach mentally, uh, by communicating a little bit better, getting a better understanding of the player's thoughts, and then trying to come up with a solution for that particular moment or forever in their soccer mindset of, hey, if I mess up or I don't complete a pass, I can't put myself mentally in a space that is going to affect me for the rest of the game. You got to, good athletes, as you know, have a short-term memory.
Yep. So one of my future guests, Lanny Basham from Mental Management, he's a Olympic medalist in rifle shooting, and he talks a lot about the self-image. And when you're negative with yourself, your self-image shrinks. When you're positive with yourself, your self-image grows. So any chance you have negative chatter, your self-image shrinks, and that's not what you want to do. And so the other thing, I think Michael Jordan said it too, you never win or lose, you win or learn. So I'm sure you preach very heavily. It's like, hey, this wasn't a win. So what did you learn in this situation? Like a pass or a shot to the goal went wide. It's like, no, it's not. I failed. It's like, what did I learn? Oh, I approached it too. Like, so how do you try to make sure they don't focus on the negative, which biologically is super easy to do? Negativity bias, so easy, right? So this is a reconditioning, and it starts with awareness. So are you preaching that preaching isn't the right word. Are you encouraging when they don't win, but they learn, like they really do focus on the learning aspect, not the negative side of it?
I do. And it's to this point, you're not going to win every battle that you face, but and to your point, as long as you're learning from it and we're not creating the same mistakes time and time again, every game, then we're progressing, right? We're developing. And this game of going and those years of, hey, I want to go undefeated, sometimes I think it could be detrimental to your season, because you may be facing weaker teams during your regular season, and then all of a sudden you make a playoff run, and then you're finding that you're up against somebody who is maybe 10 times the team you are, but you haven't faced defeat yet. So you don't really have that bad taste in your mouth about what it feels like to lose.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and by not tasting that, that defeat, you're not creating a balance of, okay, hey, we've been in this situation before and we know how to react from it.
Yeah.
It's more or less, for me, we pick out the things that we need to work on, whether it be finishing, to your point earlier, defending, whatever it may be, connection of passes. We focus in on those things that we need to improve on. I don't say, hey, we didn't, we passed, we were lazy. I don't go that negative anymore. It's more or less, hey, these are the things that I'm seeing, and I want to convey that to them to get their acknowledgement.
Yep.
If I have a player that I see that's not acknowledging it, then I may approach them at a later time, a different practice or whatever, and go, hey, listen, what are you thinking when we have these conversations post game? What is your mindset? Do you go home and dwell on it? Do you go home and I'm okay, and I'm moving on to the next day? That's where I try to develop and evolve as a coach nowadays with these players that are playing the game today.
Yeah, one of my prior guests, Coach Jay Lore from SMU, said that's the thing that coaches need to do is not every player is the same mentally. Certainly physically, you can tell they have certain talents or they don't, but everyone processes information differently. And he said the reason he was so successful was he said he knew each one of his players better than any other coach knew their players, and he prided himself on that. So let's transition a little bit to this idea of hard work and competence. One of the reasons I love you as a coach is it's not always popular to be that coach that expects a lot of players and require the hard work, right? Because again, everyone's looking for an easy avenue out. So can you talk a little bit about why it's so important to focus on the hard work and that competence, getting the skills developed? Because we mentioned prior to the call here, I believe that competence, when layered, leads to genuine confidence, right? You can't think your way to confidence. So just tell me about your hard work philosophy and how that works for you.
I just think repetition and the term hard work is used loosely throughout every sport and through coaches in general, because that becomes a term sometimes that falls on deaf ears as players, hear it daily. Hey, just put in the hard work. Something's good's going to come out of it. I think once you start putting that term hard work into fruition, it becomes a habit. And if you do it long enough, and that habit all of a sudden becomes contagious to others, especially when they're seeing the results from that particular person. I have players that at Legacy Christian Academy that I train in the off season because they don't play year round like some of these other girls do, because they need it, but more so almost mentally than physically. It's the confidence level of them coming into a tryout is much more of an easier transition when they've been doing some training or doing something that creates that. It's just, as you know, an athlete that's not ready, not prepared mentally or physically. Sometimes when you get put in a spot under the spotlight, it's an underachieving situation for them, and then they feel like a failure. And that's where I don't want anyone to ever think that they failed. It's more or less, hey, I just need to put in more work.
So let's move on to kind of day to day. Those of us that have kids, and you obviously coach a lot of kids who have parents. Every kid has a parent, and every parent has a perspective on how to raise them and how they view sports and how they view the coaches who coach their kids. So tell us a little bit about how parents can help you as a coach have consistent messaging so that you ultimately get more out of the child than you otherwise would.
Yeah, I think it's more that the parent has to be, I use the term sometimes, we as parents have blinders on because we're focused on our kids. But I think they need to let the coaching, especially if you're paying for the coaching at the select level, let the coaches convey the message. Don't misconstrue what the message may be by getting it from the kid, because, again, depending on the age group, I may have to say the same thing to the same team or player multiple times before it actually sinks in and it comes to fruition in a way where they're executing on it, right? So as a parent, I think you just have to have patience, even though a lot don't, because it's in Dallas Fort Worth, for instance, it's a results driven sport. I mean, I think all of them are, but for some reason here in Texas, we're ultra competitive and we want to win, and not really give that time to have our kid learn the true process of how the sport is to be played. And there's also the factor that not every coach has the same message and has the same mindset either, right? Some coaches out there are win. So I'm going to pick your kid because she's a top forward in this age group. So I need someone that's going to score 2 or 3 goals a game, right? And then I'm going to try to pick the best of every sport or every position and try to put the ultimate team together. So I don't really have to develop as a coach and really teach these kids the way of playing. I'm just going to let their current skill set build my reputation. My message to the parents are basically be patient. If the parents have a win-win-win attitude, then that kid is going to have that attitude and not understand that there's work involved to get to that win-win.
Right. I think also they say it takes 20 attaboys to get rid of one criticism. So I think the consistency of being not for the sake of being positive, right? You don't want to be this disingenuous, but I think I've always tried to find my kids doing good and attaboy, because they're gonna do something that doesn't make us happy and we're gonna criticize. So I just think stacking the positives day in and day out is really important. So great insights. Okay, so before we wrap up, smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and share this video with your friends. Coach Jack, thanks so much. Last question I have for you is other coaches are thinking about incorporating some aspects of the mindset, of the mental side of sports. What kind of things would you give for them to consider to start having mindset become more of a day-to-day part of their coaching program?
I think watching podcasts like this, reading up on how to evolve as a coach, will get you to that point of learning the mental aspect of it, and not just like we were talking earlier. I just want to win. I just want to put the best 11 kids out there and see where it takes me. You've got to be able to relate to your players now. I wish I would have, you've heard that term. I wish I knew now what I know, or know now what I knew, or however it goes,
Yep.
I just wished I would have learned that this point where I'm at now 20 years ago, because my teams and my players would have been much better off. Even though I was very positive and encouraging, I think that's always going to be some skill sets a coach has to have. If you're always on the negative and you're always picking someone apart or the team apart, or tactically what we did wrong, and not put in those positives, those attaboys, as you were saying earlier, being patient, but trying to evolve your overall skill set as a coach, because a lot of coaches already think they got it or they know it, and don't try to evolve with today's sports or today's world, today's kids.
Yeah. I think, you can kind of parallel parenting, right? When our kids are young, it's easy to stay physically focused, moving them from point A to point B. That's easy, right? The knucklehead can move a baby but as they get older, your kids are getting older. It's here. You got to have conversations intellectually, emotionally, because that's the currency that really matters. So I think that's really good insight. So Coach Jack, thanks so much for the time.